Tonight we're going to have a first for us, which is an open discussion which is organised by the Manchester Salon, and it features and concentrates on the idea, is there art in them there hills? The basic premise is we've got all these 55 different venues all over New Mills with what you should agree is the highest possible standard of the visual arts. And in the words of Simon, who's helped to organise tonight, something's going on. What is it? What is it that makes New Mills and this area special? I came to New Mills 7 years ago, and it's just by chance that I happened to come to this area, and I had a look round, and there was something about the area that really attracted me to New Mills, and it is this feeling that there is art in the air. Everywhere you go, there are things on street corners. When I came up, there was knitting on the railings. At Christmas, there are lights that are incredibly creative. There are 2 festivals that happen, a carnival and a festival, and they're incredibly creative. And that's what we want to explore tonight.
There has been a fascination with the city among contemporary artists recently. It's been a sort of place where it seems it's authentic and where people can search for some kind of truth, and where there's a kind of place for critical thought as well. And looking at this and seeing what's happening here, I sense that there's a kind of counter movement here, where a preference by some artists to move away from the city and to live and to work in the edges of the city and in the rural settings. And I think that's what's interesting, and I think that's really what we're going to look at tonight. We're going to unpick that and find out what's driving it and where it's taking us. Anne's going to speak first, and Anne Jackson leads the New Mills University of the Third Age, where she teaches art history and leads the art history
I lead the art
appreciation
history group. We look at art history and art appreciation.
And John is a poet, an author. He's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and is the honorary creative writing fellow at Leicester University. And his most recent books, he's written 6 books, but his most recent book is Full Blood.
Just nicely modeled.
Thank you, Anne. And our third speaker is James Heartfield, and James is a writer and lecturer, and he's founding director of the development think tank Audacity, and lives in North London, where he works at the University of Westminster. And James is also an author and has written a number of books, including The Death of the Subject Explained. And his latest book is The Aborigines Protection Society, Humanitarian Imperialism in Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Canada, South Africa and the Congo.
My brief was to think about why artists settle here. Do the Pennines inspire artists? Or is it all part of this trend to look for culture?
Anne, there's some people at the back there saying, could you stand up?
Oh,
Could you stand up and speak up, please?
Yes. They're having right at the back. It's the acoustics. It is good.
Right.
Thank you, Anne.
A little bit little as well. So, the artists settling here, is it all just part of this wider trend for culture, a focus on culture? And yes, I think that is part of it, because we see culture everywhere, don't we? It's the buzzword now. Cafes, places like that, culture on the television. It's very trendy to be cultural. But my first thoughts were, oh, it's the wonderful hills, it's the windswept hills, the kind of things you get in the Bronte novels. It's all that kind of thing. But then I realised artists always paint where they are. You've got that from Canaletto to Stanley Spencer. They always paint the places where they are. It's an area where you can walk, you can come across nature, and this is it does inspire the artists. But why did they come here in the first place? People have moved here because their spouses have got jobs, maybe in Manchester, and they've looked around and have come across New Mills, it's so attractive, and they've settled here. But there's a snowball effect as well, because there are artists who are here and they have attracted other artists. There's also the physicality of the place. It's not linear, it's compact, isn't it? It holds a certain amount of people, and everybody knows each other. And this is the other thing, all the artists know each other, and they get comfort and support from that. They've got the lovely gallery, which is a cooperative, where they show their works and hopefully sell works. But what they have to do is work for a number of days or hours in the year. I'd like to mention the New Mills Community Potters as well. They're a collective. And participation as well, and we do have this in New Mills. New Mills is a wonderful place. We do have the participation in New Mills. We've got the New Mills Community Arts, and they deal with people with mental problems, marital problems, disabilities. And I know through learning floristry what it's like for somebody who they've not created anything in their lives, and then they've got someone to show them how to make these wonderful paper patterns that you can see in New Mills Library. So it gives people a boost. One thing that I found out, which I thought was amazing, I found this out, I've spoken to so many artists in the last week. What I found out from one of the artists is that it is cheaper to rent a studio in Manchester, in Salford, than it is in a place like Hebden Bridge, and I know John Siddique lives in Hebden Bridge. So there must be some reason for that. It's obviously the people who are there in Hebden Bridge. It's an arty place. But you would expect the opposite.
Lovely to be here. I'm John Siddique, and I'm from that place at Hebden Bridge. Hebden has this reputation, I suppose, of being a very arty place, and even Anne said it's a very arty place there. I don't think it's very true in a way. I suppose for a long time, what it was really famous for was fustian cotton. We had 27 trouser factories and 9,000 people living in the valley, kind of walking down with clogs and what have you. And Sylvia Plath, when she came to stay with Ted's parents in 1959, if you look in her journals, she bloody hated the place. It was a dirty, grim, black place full of smoke and what have you, and she was sitting in the Stubbing Wharf pub, surrounded by spit and sawdust and men with flat caps and whippets. I've hidden my flat cap, actually. And it got so bad, actually, that nobody wanted to live there, that it was slated for being demolished. The whole town was going to be demolished in 1968, 69, and it's where the M62 was going to be. But because the housing was so cheap, in fact, you didn't have to pay for houses, or you could get a house for sort of 25 to 50 quid. Kind of hippies and outsider types moved in with a kind of bit of an intellectual bent and suggested that the M62 go elsewhere, which is why the M62 is where it is today. So there's signs in Hebden Bridge of 500 years of creativity and stuff like that, but utter and complete bullshit is the truth of that, really. No, nobody wanted the place at all until about sort of 30 years ago. The thing about Hebden is, like I say, it has this reputation, but it's only, I've been there sort of 15 years now, I think it is, 14 or 15 years, and it's only in the last couple of years that I've actually really started enjoying it, because like most places, there are dark sides to places, and when you come to Hebden, you see the coffee shops and the little art galleries and the reputation it's also art and all that sort of thing. But we've got a very, very high suicide rate, terrible drug problems. We've got what you might call an underclass who are completely not seen, and real kind of gentrification and divisions, which are not kind of addressed at all. But as for being an artist there, I don't think I kind of think of myself as being kind of part. I don't know if there's a Hebden Bridge clique. I mean, we have Northlight Art Galleries, we have the Handmade Parade, We have a winter kind of light parade, and we have a bonfire thing. This weekend's been a blues festival. We have the Trades Club, where you get lots of bands coming and playing, which was opened by Karl Marx in the 1800s. He actually sort of founded it when he was in Manchester. You get Patti Smith coming over and people like that. So we have this kind of reputation. But it also has, like I say, this dark side. A lot of people come to get very drunk and very stoned there because the police don't come anywhere near it over the weekend, and things like that. And it can be a very isolating and lonely place because it sustains this kind of middle-class bubble where everybody's very nice, but nobody kind of really bothers with you apart from saying hello in the street. But you'll die alone in your house out of loneliness, It has its kind of plus sides and its kind of downsides for me. The thing that I've enjoyed about it over the years is I come from a very kind of sort of lower working class background, and then found myself being artistic in Rochdale of all places. So nobody knows what to make of you at all. And the thing with Hebden is that it kind of holds my wildness. I don't know how else to kind of say it really. I'm not kind of a nice sociable kind of artist in any way. Ask my partner here, she'll tell you. I'm like a crazed being when I'm working. Not crazed, but I kind of go into very deep places that needs a lot of space. And we have a very big sky and this kind of sort of these tall hills, and you go out on top of them, and somehow that holds my soul enough for me to be able to create things without me turning into some kind of, alcoholic kind of crazed person. So I don't drink or anything, but that would be the alternative if I didn't have this thing to hold me. I mean, I can't honestly think of living anywhere else. I have considered London. London to me seems just like another village, really. It seems to, within literature anyway, has a very kind of village kind of mentality. And I know the media is based there, and you get the chance to go to the right parties. And if you do, then you get kind of the British Council sending you here and sending you there. But actually, to be a real artist, you are on your own. You might have kind of supportive people and things like that, but nobody moving to a place is not going to make you an artist, With London, it seems to me that London has kind of rendered itself pretty useless in a way, because it's cut itself off. Anywhere that ignores over 50 million people and thinks that it's a thing of its own, without kind of reference to the rest of the country, well, it's made itself kind of obsolete in a way. It doesn't consider us at all up here. There is something in the hills. There is. The Pennines are very special. There's that kind of bleakness, which has this beauty, which allows something to come out of us. Sometimes we almost need a kind of a wall to project against, I suppose. And I think with art, it's a case of kind of, having a wall to kind of show your colours against. And I think the Pennines are that. I think the Pennines will allow something to kind of come through in the spirit in a way. I think we'll stop there. It's just the beauty of the bleak is the projection of the soul. I think that's the place to stop. Yeah, thank you.
We're standing, aren't we? I come from London, so I did grow up in Elland, and I knew Hebden Bridge when I was a boy in the 70s. There were artists there in the 70s. I think Bill Gaiman, the photographer, was there, and it did have. You could get a cream tea basically in the 70s. You couldn't get a coffee. You could get a cream tea, and it was kind of tourist-ish. It was even then. There was quite a fad, as there still is, for industrial archaeology. I think coming back, I feel the call, the siren call of the northern vernacular, and I see it in the works and I see it here, and maybe that is an outsider's view, but I think it's good and interesting, and I want to think about it. And I don't know about you, but I'm very much enjoying Happy Valley. I think Sally Wainwright's journey around Halifax and Huddersfield is beautiful, and it's absorbing, and it's an interesting presentation, as was Last Tango in Halifax, and I think they're both intriguing for the as a presentation of the Pennines to the world. and the use of landscape, and of a particular kind of landscape. I think Pauline referred to this idea of landscape which isn't nature, or isn't their nature anyway. It's a kind of halfway, and that's very much the Pennines, I think, is that it is an industrial space as well as a rural space. You see it, I think, also again in the works of the painter Judith Tucker, who's very interested in the concrete and the stone within the moss, and exploring space as not a kind of romantic field, but as in that spirit of industrial archaeology. So I think the whole question of the northern vernacular is a compelling one, and not one I think that is easy to escape, and quite what it means I think is an interesting question. I think you see it in writing, where there's a northern comedy which is essentially a mock. It works as a mock of high ambitions. You know, if you read it's in Peter Tinniswood or in Keith Waterhouse novels, there essentially it's to make fun of pretension, and I think it's important, a demotic spirit that tears down a rather over highfalutin idea. You see it, by the way, it's the meaning of the title, isn't it? Last Tango in Halifax, which works. It's like a Alexander Pope heroic couplet, isn't it? We get the last tango, but it's not Paris, it's Halifax, and it's in her work, I think, as well, which is a good exploration of gender, you know, and really interesting on what it is to be a woman of years, you know, to be, and the characters are kind of wrecks and survivors, and coping with a masculine world that is fallen away, which I think is all particularly interesting. You didn't mention the most important thing about Hebden Bridge from the outside, which is it is the lesbian capital of Britain. And it's, I mean, this is it's an outsider's fascination. And it was it, you know, I'm trying to think in my childhood, we knew, though long before, you know, if you go to Shibden Hall in Halifax, that Anne Lister, who kept Shibden Hall, would always wear men's clothes and had a lover. And her diaries were only really translated in 94, I think, were published. But you could tell, by the way, you know, we all knew what it meant when we saw the portrait of Anne Lister. There was in Shibden Hall then, I don't know if it's there now, but it features in all the books. And they're interesting kind of investigations of the kind of what it means to be a man or to be a woman, to be of age, all things that are looking. I want to say as well, though, that vernacular can have different meanings. I read both in the painter Judy Tucker's work, but also in Sally Wainwright's work, there's a kind of elegiac quality. I read it actually in some of these things that we're looking at, and I feel somewhat alienated. I want to say there's something sad, too sad, about the living in the past, always kind of overwhelmed by the shadow of the past, and I think that's a kind of a quality about the way the arts have lived in this shell of the industrial world, which may be kind of slightly overwhelming. And I'd rather, I'd like to suggest as well, there is another way of the vernacular, a different meaning, and I'll suggest the work of the great Leeds painter, now dead, artist, Tony Earnshaw, for whom the vernacular was a mock of pretension. And he wrote, he did a number of cartoons and paintings. He wrote the series The View from the Back of Town, and the back of the town was a place which kind of belied the reality, and it was an interesting use, I thought, of the rhythms and bluntness of being northern was that it was a tearer down of pretensions and did some powerful things. That's about all I want to say really, and I think it's I'm responding in a way to what I'm seeing, which is what it is to be the vernacular, what it is to be in these hills.
Some of the things that struck me about what all of you were saying really is maybe a feeling that there's a sort of jaded feeling about in art at the moment, in the sense that certainly if you look at the cities and the urban centres, there's a sense that everything's kind of all boxed off and everything is bureaucratised and there's a lot of administration. And what James was talking about, that kind of blunt northern vernacular, is actually the opposite of that. It's opposite of that kind of metropolitan sensibility that wants everyone to feel comfortable and wants to measure everything, and is really quite limiting on the human imagination. So that was one of the things I'd like to sort of ask about, really, to ask you to think about. The does this kind of working in this kind of landscape and working outside of the flagship art centres of the city centre, does it make artists freer? Do artists feel freer to explore themes and to write about them? Certainly, like the northern novels of the 50s and 60s came at all sorts of things that no one in polite society would ever have wanted to talk about or think about. And we have a different kind of polite society now, where artists have to be very respectful to all sorts of in different ways. And I wonder if there's a sort of freedom here working in this area.
I am sure that the artists around here feel freer, because as I said, I've been speaking to them. They don't want the constraints of people.
Can you hear?
Telling
You're going to have to maybe.
I am sure that some artists around here feel good about what they're doing, that they'd like to be free of the constraints of someone telling them what they should be painting, what they should be producing. This is what came across to me very much in the last week when I've been speaking to the artists. And they have got that freedom. Maybe not all of them, because obviously I did speak to all of them.
I personally can't speak for any other artists. I think that it's interesting. I was at Leeds train station the other day and I bumped into the guy who's the literature officer for Yorkshire for the Arts Council, and he was just sort of saying, there is some money if you want to apply for some kind of thing. And because I don't apply for Arts Council money, I used to, and I kind of stopped. And he says, but it's a bit gimmicky, and that's the problem, I think, with when you go for the. It's almost like unless you have a digital strand, unless you have there's a blog involved. What workshops are you going to do? I want to write a bloody book, about some rocks and trees. I mean, the word that they use these days is psychogeography. But I just want to. I'm interested at the moment in kind of the effect of as the landscape as metaphor for what's inside the person, And that's what my next book's going to be about. So I won't get any Arts Council funding for that. It's not likely, unless I can digitise it in some way and whatever. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that that there is that way, but because if you want to go for the money side, I guess, then there is that kind of that reductive, kind of relativistic sort of aspect to it. With my own work, I've never. And the older I get, kind of the worse I get in a way, and that I think that the northern, the thing that James talked about, that northern kind of wanting to tear things down, gets even stronger, actually. So there must be something in the water,
Although with the Arts Council, the grant, also comes the sort of imprimatur, or the recognition that what you are doing is art.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how do you know what you're doing here? How do you measure the value of it? In a sense, do you have a critical kind of community here that responds to work that's done here? Or does it your public, or how do you?
No, do you? That's the thing. I think the problem with going down that route of the Arts Council route or whatever is that there's no room to fail. So there's no actual significant creation a lot of the time. That there's a kind of a playing safe. But unless you can completely crash and burn and something not work out in any way, shape or form, there's no way to actually make a piece of art. You have to have the space to completely mess up. Otherwise, you're never going to put your heart over the fence. You know, you're going to just play nice. Oh, I was kind of successful like this before, so I'll just do that again. You know, you get some people who write the same book over and over and over again, kind of thing, and don't try something new. So, I don't know.
I thought it'd be good to reflect on this, you know, this exercise here as a model, which has got a very light touch of administration, quite a strong voluntary element, you know. But mostly it's the shops and you know, volunteers that are carrying this event, and I think there's very little top-down administration. And I think it's quite pointedly kind of producer-led. I think that's one thing which is interesting. But it begs a question also, I suppose. Well, where is the harsh judgment in a way? I mean, is this creativity for the producers, or is it where is the public choosing, or is there? There's no bureaucrat choosing, but what's driving this creativity here?
What's your relationship as an artist to your public? Do you have you write books do you judge your merit as an artist, or your work and how it's progressing? Is that something that you would measure from the feedback you get from people?
No, not at all. Because I've always been a reader since I was whatever age. I picked up a book and then read my way through Rochdale Library, things thanks to my school teacher. In my head, this might sound pompous, but in my head I've got Pablo Neruda and E. Cummings and Jean Rhys, George Orwell, and I know what a good book is. And if I can't, when I write something, I tend to kind of try to visualise it being on the shelf with the people that I love. And if it's not fit to go there, and that's not being big-headed, but you know, they kind of, that my writing workshop is those people. But at the same time, I would never put anything out that I don't get to stop me getting an overinflated sense of myself. I have a couple of close readers, my friend Catherine Smith, who's a well-known poet, and an academic called Claire Chambers, who actually teaches my work on her course, the Post-Colonial Studies course at York. And so they're the first people who tend to see what I'm writing and will give me very direct feedback. And the basic rule is, don't let me put anything rubbish out. And they will see everything. So if they say, no, you know, you lost the plot here, I trust them enough to kind of do that. But in terms of my readership, I mean, I do believe it's an artist's job is to kind of lead their audience in a way, not be led by the audience. And the way I survive is I have a mailing list that I've built over 20 years with just a few thousand people on it. Every single person on it I've earned by doing events. You know, maybe one of you will sign up to that mailing list tonight or something like that. And that core constituency kind of keep me alive, that's it, you know, and I send out a monthly email to those and I get direct feedback from them, kind of thing, but nobody would ever say, you know, you must do a piece like this or you must do a piece like that. So yeah, I don't know. So the critical side is there. I mean, critics who write for newspapers I tend not to pay any attention to at all, because I tend to see them as people who just can't do what the artist does. They're failures. So, you know, they have no relevance really, and they're trying to make capital out of their kind of inadequacies.
Hope we've got some critics out there.
I hope so. I'm being very naughty, but that is my job, isn't it? You know.
Maybe we should take a few questions and comments.
It's a comment, but primarily a question. Jane, you referred to the northern vernacular, and you referred to a particular word which I'm not familiar with, so this comment is not necessarily directed at the work. But what I think ran through all three of the introductions was the idea that there was a sort of distinctive voice that was linked to place. And I mean, some people were emphasising the hills and the importance of the physical environment, almost as if the place gave you a particular voice. And that's why no one's unique to the Pennines. Every country in the world, I think, and even other parts of England. Dickens talked about North Kent as having a particular, resonance as well. But I just wondered if, with some of the arguments about place, that there's a danger of that becoming very parochial, becoming, too rooted in the place, and then not being able to speak. And I suppose, like John, I'm quite familiar with Cambridge. I worked there just about a year before we moved there, and still remain some sort of connections with it. And many people, to me, seem to be escaping. It seemed to be a bit like the debtor's retreat. That everybody was getting away from something. Because when you met people in pubs who were involved in art, they were always escaping. So I just wonder whether this idea that artist colonies, St. Ives is another one, a bit more sunshine, but maybe has the same, that in fact people come here from outside to escape. And so I just wonder whether there isn't a tension between sort of rootedness in the place and trying to use the place and trying to reflect the place, but also maybe escaping, and then how you communicate. So I'm not sure if I've explained that very well, but I'm always aware of this, that when people talk about a place, and they talk about the rootedness in the place, they're often sort of distancing themselves from the rest of the world and particularising that place, and in some ways escaping from things rather than coming somewhere where they can re-engage. Am I being too hard?
Well, you'll find out when they come back on that. Okay, thanks, and I'll take just a few more, then. Yes, Simon.
Similar question, really, but a different angle. So when I kind of thought about having a discussion as part of the Derbyshire Open Arts, I was trying to work out whether it was pushing it a little bit too far to have a discussion about Hepburn Bridge versus New Mills. Because there is a bit of commonality with the Pennines, but my sense of Hepburn Bridge is there is a very literary focused artistic environment, whereas New Mills does seem to be very much more visually focused. And I was just trying to work out if there was anything in that, whether there was a change in time, that we're now a bit less literary and a bit more visually centred. But I think the thing that sticks out a mile is probably the commonality of the two, that there's more than the physicality of hills, there's a much more a cultural physicality of working class environments, old industrial towns that have pretty much been gutted of their industry, left vacant, and artists pouring in there, or bohemians looking, escaping their debts, or what have you. But there is an influx of outsiders in some way, maybe outsiders in their own rights, estranged from society, but outsiders of an artistic character coming in and in some ways kind of being a bit of a spur to something that was already there. And for me, the experience of coming and living in New Mills is that there is an environment of a society, a working class society largely, with a profoundly strong cultural sense of community and a desire to kind of commune, which you don't get in a lot of other towns around here, as it happens, but you certainly don't get in the city. So for me, the physicality is probably the community side of it. And there was an interesting word that you used, Dan, which is about participation in new mills. I think there is a huge amount of participation, but I wouldn't use that word myself. That to me seems to be very much art funding, cultural organisation word, where it's top down, how do you get people to participate? Whereas what seems to be going on around the Derbyshire Open Arts and the New Mills Fest is very much more a spontaneous activity of some artistic personalities coming together and organising something themselves of, I think, phenomenal aesthetic value, which you wouldn't get from top-down art organisation. How do you get people involved? Because there, the primary purpose is how you get people involved, rather than the art and the outcome, which I think John was quite right actually, pointing to there's something driving the individual to produce good art. There is something driving individuals here to produce good art, but why they come to the hills, I still don't get that. And it might be just that it's cheap housing. I don't know, but that's the thing for me.
To add to the last two speakers, the three people who first came together to start New Mills Arts and New Mills Arts Fest, we are all incomers. But we are incomers in the first place because there was already an artistic community here. And that's one of the reasons we were attracted. The other reason was that the houses were cheap.
Yes.
And personally, I've lived through two places where an artistic community began a revival of an urban area, which then became too expensive to live in. And this cycle goes on. I'm hoping the cycle doesn't happen again in New Mills. I'd be very much afraid of gentrification of New Mills because I don't have the wherewithal to move on a third time. But the fact that there was, and when you see the work that is here in New Mills, there is possibly a 50-50 split between artists who were born and bred in New Mills and people who have entered from outside because of those two factors, but also because it's a very inclusive community here. It's very easy to feel that in this community you can fit in, that it's safe, and certainly I wouldn't want to be moving in an urban area to a cheap and therefore challenging area at my age. I wouldn't want to repeat that process again. So the factor of community and safeness is something that I treasure, and I wouldn't want to see damaged by, say, a polarisation of the community through an influx of very ostentatious use of money. I very much value the place that it is. The reason that we did the Arts Trail and the Arts Fest is simply that we enjoy it. You know, we're not looking to gentrify the place. We enjoy doing it. Other people enjoy it. The traders have come to enjoy it and become involved and actually get into, instead of just curating and imposing an artist on them, they've become part of a process of curating and enjoying what and choosing and doing what they do. And then the people of all parts of New Mills, whether they are artistic inclined or not, enjoy using the trail and venues. And that's what's important. Whatever else might come as a result of that is I'm not going to lay any claims to. But it certainly is important, just from an entirely cultural and spiritual point of view, that people come out onto the streets, talk about it, enjoy it, and discuss with one another.
Yeah.
Just to carry on with that, well, I mean, we've been up here for 7 years now, and I think we've got a lot of people, we've spoken to a lot of artists, and They say we've been here 7 or 8 years with this sort of thing. I think a lot of people are bringing out from the town what they've lost. You know, you hear the stories. 50 years ago, you could leave your back door open. I wouldn't even advise it here, but even so, there was this community that you were able to get in and engrossed in. That seems to have gone in a lot. I'm from Stockport, and I've lived there all my life until I moved here. So I can bring out the things from the town that I enjoy. And I think a lot of people come here and say, but that community which was there when I was young, seems to have gone. I mean, I lived in 2 streets within one another for 50 years. I knew a lot of people, but I go back now and it's completely changed. And I think what's happening is there's a mixture of people who've been here for a long time and other people who've come out and take a little bit of time to find out it and say, well, yes, I enjoy this, and I don't feel an outsider. I mean, it's this thing, you're not, you know, perhaps I will be accepted as a new mill person in 50 years' time, but I'm still here. And I think that's what's happening. A lot of us have brought out our own things, and we can see we can satisfy ourselves in the community. There's a tremendous community spirit, the things that go on with the festivals and the lantern walks, and I found no difficulty getting on with people, whereas I think now in the urban area you've only got to move a couple of streets, you're almost in a foreign place, because nobody talks to one another anymore. I think we've still got the community spirit in New Mills, and I assume other places like this, and I think it really enhances the town itself.
So I'll take a couple more then, yeah, and then we'll come back and ask.
Well, it'll be a surprise in Martle, where I come from, that New Mills is so posh and so intellectual. Of course, we actually think you've only just come out of the stone. Slight exaggeration. One of the things that I'm most interested about this is that we're having a conversation about Pennines, which is an important geographically, psychogeographical importance, but also in artistic terms. Where would we be without the Brontes or Elizabeth Bennet coming to Chatsworth, or all the rest of it? But the basic fact is Hebden Bridge is a very artificial place. New Mills less so, because of its industrial heritage. They both have a canal. But one of the things that New Mills has, which Hebden Bridge does not have, and I don't know whether you'd agree with this analysis in terms of actually living in Hebden Bridge, is Hebden Bridge is a place which is relatively isolated from the large accommodations around. Now New Mills is not. And New Mills is sitting on the edge of one of the most, if not the most vibrant area for the arts in general that exists in this country, certainly at least in England, and that is the Northwest. And the Northwest extends from the Lake District in artistic terms all the way through to Liverpool, and includes all the universities and colleges and all the other things that are generating fine arts studies, and students are generating writers, and some of them coming into the field late in life, like myself, and who's your agent anyway, because I need one. And all those connections. So you're not alone, you're not a small isolated beacon of hope and culture in a wasteland of white, of gritstone and limestone. You're actually part of a very large and important region, artistic region, in a European context. And what I'm most concerned about is not the quality of the art at a community level, which I've seen some this afternoon, and nor the incredibly good and can't say that what brings us here this evening isn't anything other than an extremely good initiative and well organised and has been developed over a long period of time, which is very significant. But I'm also concerned about where will the great art come from? Where will the art that defines a relationship to a sense of place and order and political structure that, let's say, Love on the Dole defines about that particular period in the 20th century. A Robert Tressel in a London situation, or to be less politically oriented, a name much forgotten in books in terms of Manchester, Howard Spring. Much underrated and possibly about to be really realised as an important author. The visual things, Essie and his popularity in terms of his pictures in the northwest, but particularly in the Manchester area, and so on. So I'm a bit worried about people thinking in terms of their small locality as being the extent of their artistic ambition. I'm more interested in making links. If your area is one that will centre on visual arts, hooray! But it's also got to be connected with the other people, with the other areas around. As in the 19th century, people were connected in Manchester to the Portico Museum. So don't worry about it, you're not on your Todd. Look west, young people.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Great. And I'm going to just ask one more contribution because there was a hand up there, and then see what we can get some responses from the speakers here.
Well, mine's just very short, really. I don't think it matters where you live, where you come from. If you're going to be an artist due to your family circumstances, your beautiful environment, or Lowry, who came from Salford, Helen Bradley, that painted wonderful paintings from Oldham. Doesn't matter where you live or where you come from. When I went to Hebden Bridge for the first time, I thought I'd gone back to the 1960s. I thought it was in a war of the hippie era, and it was a shock to me. And I do think it's an absolutely beautiful place to be. But then I do know of the other sort of darker elements of it. Something to do with the light not coming down into the sunshine and into the thing. But I do feel, if you're an artist, you're an artist. It doesn't matter where you live. There's wonderful artists in London, there's wonderful artists in Glasgow, there's wonderful poets and writers from all over the country. So it doesn't matter what your area is. It's who you are and how you develop your own things. And that's just what I feel about art and literature.
Thank you. I'm going to just try to summarise some of the things I thought that were said then. Ask if you would come back on some of those. I thought there was a number of people who were asking about place and artists working in particular places. On the one hand, some people were talking about the sense of community and there being a sort of sense of a really supportive environment to work in. And then a couple of people raised the problem, however, counterposed a problem to this, which is that that it becomes almost too safe or parochial. And there was a question there about where does the great art come from? And it did make me think actually of the of this particular place and its relationship to work and manufacturing, which is different now from what it was in the past, when there was a manufacturing and a very active kind of industrial heartland here. And I think that there's another set of questions then about the relationship of the artist to the place. Is the artist the insider or the outsider? And then some very nice questions about where creativity actually comes from. Is it just something that is inherent in people and it will come out wherever you are, or is there a kind of a configuration that's needed of conditions that will stimulate or creativity in an area or in a person? And this idea of community as well, and what we mean by that, I thought there were some very interesting questions there. Who would like to come back on any of those?
Well,
Yeah, I've got but Anne first, then James is ready, and then I'm sure you have. Yeah.
Well, I could agree with a lot of what each speaker said. What Pam said, I did get the impression from artists that there was this creativity in them and it had to come out. And when I first started to speak, I did say that artists will create wherever they are and they will paint what's around them. But I'm very conscious of this thing within them that I feel as if I haven't got it. It's got to come out. The community spirit, yes, it's palpable in New Mills, and I think the people of New Mills love the town trail. I think they love the art festival for its own sake, absolutely. The gentleman at the back said perhaps people could become old-fashioned because if they're so engaged in the surroundings. And I've been racking my brains to think of some of the artworks I've seen where it's featured recycling. You know, that is a very modern thing. Beautiful butterflies that have been made from cans that you see discarded in the street. And it's presented in a way that the cans are there. And then these beautiful butterflies made from Red Bull cans. And it's as if those butterflies have escaped from the holes that you make in the top. So, you know, people are forward-looking. I've been speaking to artists today who are using modern technology. So I think some people will be stuck just painting landscapes, but I think other people will be seeking more. And then Simon, and I spoke to Simon at least 2 months ago about whether it is the environment or not, and Simon, I still haven't come to an answer. You said you didn't know, and I don't know. I've been pondering about it, I've been speaking to people, but it's just an imponderable thing.
I think Kevin raises a good point about locality, and I think it is a double-edged sword. I think it's one of those things, and you know, I was thinking of Sally Wainwright precisely because there is a slightly chocolate box representation of the North as an object. And you know, there's great books, by the way. You know, Stuart McConey and Paul Morley and Beatrix Campbell talked about this different things, and they're all toying with an idea of a kind of northern nationalism, and it's a problem, you know, as well as it's a lever, because it feels constraining. And I think that's it's worth looking at. The you know, I loved. I mean, I don't think he is northern, but it was written in the northern vernacular. Ross Raisin's rather excellent God's Own Country. Well, but better on the writing than the plot, actually. But and it really was a kind of creation for consumption of a vernacular like to be enjoyed. And I feel worried. I'm worried about that in some of the work I see, that it's a little bit nostalgic, a little bit, there's something too cute about the industrial archaeology there. You know, the ruins of the present. There's something, they call it ruin porn, don't they, in America, when people take the camera around Detroit and show you all the wrecks, and they say, well, that's true, but you're really kind of enjoying too much this sad story. And it wasn't always that, you know, it's not the only element, you know, there's a lot going on. When I was a boy, we went on happenings that were organised by Robin Page at Leeds University, who was Fluxus International guy, and it was a huge thing. And Mike Sandel did Mickey Mouse and the Machine Gun, which is exactly what it sounds like. Mickey Mouse and the Machine Gun. It was a great kind of
I'm going to come back again to that question of criticality because, in this northern vernacular, and someone mentioned love on the dole, someone mentioned that kind of writing. It was driven by sort of a desire to escape from as well. There's huge currents of people. There's a real love-hate relationship with the north. And everyone always wants to get on that train to London and get out.
There's a plot of room at the top, isn't
it is.
To get to the smoke.
Yeah, and they're all either catching that train or
not
missing that train, And in that sort of tension between the kind of nostalgia for the place, there's this inexplicable love for a place that you just can't leave it. Or when you do leave it, it's a wrench. But you've got to get out of it because if you stay there, it's going to swallow you up and stifle you. That's the kind of dynamic that makes, in a way, the periphery, the art that's made in the periphery, so exciting. Because, and yet the problem maybe is that what are you escaping from now? Because the cities aren't the bustling and dynamic places. As James was saying, artists are going around cities looking at the kind of decaying aesthetic of the city that's been overgrown and taken back to nature. So I wonder there's a problem, John, as a writer, as an artist, in finding, the kind of the conflict or the tension between. You said in Hampton Bridge, there's this dark side. Does that play at all in your writing? And who are those people? Do they read your work? Or what kind of relationship do you have with them?
Yeah, I do write. I have written about the dark side of Hampton Bridge. We had a very famous murder, the murder of Lindsay Reimer, 15 years ago now. That's talked about in my book Recital. And sometimes I make a joke. I can't remember what's in this one, but there's one about. I think it might. Is it coffee? It's called Coffee Morning. It's either in there or it's in a previous one. Where the gossip in Pennines can be so bad. We have the young immies. They tend to have coffee on Thursday mornings, and if you go in the cafe where they are, they gossip about the one who isn't there. And one time, somebody was slagging this man off to me, who'd done something very bad to one of her friends, but it was actually me she was talking about. So it was quite an amazing thing, because it was just passed on so much. So yeah, but in terms of the dark side of stuff,
what did you do?
What did I do? I just took it. I wrote a piece about it. What else can you do? Yeah, it's in there. There you go.
It's quite shocking. They want to hear it.
Shall I read it to you?
Yeah,
okay. It's not meant to be. I was meant to go somewhere else. I'll read this to you. So I'm kind of quite aware how artificial Hebden is, and I will actually say it to its face. There you go. But they like me well enough, so it's all right. This town has perished at occasional tables where we occasionally meet for coffee, and the names we lash perish in our unsewing circle. One occasionally tries to break free, to run out of the valley. It's a long road scattered with the greying bones of those without enough escape velocity. Those who have perished serve as a warning to all who would try. There is the occasional dissent at the table. There are the occasional objections to our power. At these times we use absolute force, the undermine through gossip, the slap down, the revealing of intimate details that never quite happened the way they are being told now. The perished walk around, hungry ghosts of shoppers, finding little succour in the co-op between the bread and the beer aisles. So, that is Hebden, very much the kind of dark side of things. But I was trying. There's so much. You were talking about so much that I've got so much in my head that I don't kind of know where to go. I can only talk. I can't. I say I don't feel comfortable talking about anybody else. Really, it's just not right to do so. I can't represent another artist. the things that kind of resonate for me out of the bits you were talking about were about where's the great art going to come from, and this thing about parochialism. And all I can tell you is in my own work, in 2009 the British Council asked me to be the poet in residence for the city of Los Angeles. And so I live in a place of 4,500 people and a lot of sheep. You know, and I know you know what that's like if you're here. And I find myself in a city of 30 million people. And what I wrote about, and I was free to do anything I wanted to, apart from I had to go to university a couple of times a week and just give little talks, most about kind of the spaces in haikus and things like that, which is fantastic. But I found myself in LA. Well, the first thing that was a real shock when I arrived, I was staying in a place called Marina del Rey, in a very posh apartment with a swimming pool and my own gas grill, and I was 3 blocks from the Pacific Ocean at Venice Beach. Yet I was there. That bugger, John Siddique, was sitting in this place, and me, lonely and not knowing what the hell to do with myself. And I felt like exactly the same person as I did in Hebden Bridge at that time. And I didn't know a damn soul. And yet what I found myself writing about was the Pennines, a place called Widow. And I gathered stories whilst I was there. And when I came back to Hebden Bridge, I wrote about LA. So for me, Hebden has always been the place that I come back to, and is a blank enough space that I can then write about the other things that I've kind of done on my expeditions out. I've done pieces work in India and Ireland and the US and so on. And so for me, Hebden is a place to come back to that will let me be open enough. I've got my coffee shop where I just sit with my journal every day and things like that. Where I can just be, but as for where, and then I write about everything, so it's kind of like, it's my ship, in a way, that there's a place to come back to. So, I understand what you say about kind of the parochialism thing. I think it is a possibility, but at the same time, you know, there is another way to do it. And as for where the great art's going to come from, it isn't going to come from Arts Council funded stuff that has outcomes. And has to kind of engage a particular audience, I don't think. It may do, you never know, they may be onto something. But unless people unless artists kind of kick against that and actually do what moves through them, you just don't know. I mean, I always think of William Blake. William Blake's work fell into complete obscurity. Nobody knew. We think he's you know, you can't imagine a world without William Blake. And yet he was completely forgotten. Until somebody picked up a book of his in a library somewhere and went, bloody hellfire. And it was only that person discovering this book that gave us William Blake. We can't, in the time that we're in, yes, fame is not art, you know. Winning the Booker Prize doesn't make a book a good book. It doesn't. In fact, to me, if it wins the Booker Prize, it means don't read it. Yeah. Run. And in poetry, if it wins the T.S. Eliot, just forget it. Because that's a particular clique of people. It isn't anything to do with the books at all. We have to have faith in the art. And we have to put I have this saying that I always say to myself, throw your heart over the fence. You have to throw your heart over the fence time and time again. And be honest with yourself. If what you want, if being an artist is about kind of, you know, getting the attention that your mother and father didn't give you, some ego identity thing, some identification with image, and is away from kind of the authenticity of being and the kind of the bit of God that moves through each of us, the spirit that's us, then it's always going to be lesser, you know. If we actually make the leap and try it, no one might notice, and it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the art will be made and somebody might find it, like with William Blake. Somebody might find it. But the guy was a nutter, a complete nutter. And you know, if he'd gone to the Arts Council and said, you know, I want to write Urzian or Milton or I want to write the New Jerusalem, they'd have been like, so what are the outcomes going to be? You know, it isn't going to work. You know, is there a blog about that? I don't think we have to worry too much. I think what we have to worry about is kind of letting go of that stuff and coming back to the intention of art. And of course, you know, the media is always going to dominate who gets seen, and kind of the critics and their friends and things are always going to court each other, and we can't worry about that. give up, because if we're worrying about that, we're not making the art. You know, we're not facing ourselves. And it's better to kind of, you know, try to do something for real, and, you know, and kiss the person that you love. If you can do those two things, you've done marvellous in life.
Well, thanks for that, John. I'm just going to ask, though, because there was a question raised about, I guess, what creates the conditions, and certainly, you know, what you're saying is that people create because of something inside them in some particular way. They see the world and they want to communicate it, or they have something that they want to make or say or do. But there are also things like galleries, and there are an artist needs to be published, and the work needs to be kind of gathered together. It could be that someone may by chance just find something in a library, as you say, or just come across something. But artists don't just build careers, they also build bodies of work, and they're helped in this by curators and by galleries, and this kind of infrastructure that goes with that supports, in a way, and takes their work out of the studio, out of the small group, and into the community. And they can do it on their own, and they don't have to have all of that mediation, but it helps in a way. And driving through from Manchester, I drove through a lot of towns on the way from Manchester to Stockport to here, and I don't see, they didn't appear to me, they didn't strike me to be, you know, like New Mills. There seemed to be no kind of sense of creativity there. They looked like run down, a lot of them, and quite... So what's happening here that isn't happening there? And is this something that can go out beyond New Mills, into the surrounding areas? Can it take something out? Is it being collected? Is it being organised and published? And is that necessary? And if that is necessary, then do you have to look to the Arts Council to validate what you're doing here? I'm looking at you, Anne.
Yes, I know you're looking at me.
There might be someone out there who wants to answer that. You just, because you mentioned before, I think, about some of the feel like you did talk about some of the impacts of art, and I wondered if you thought that perhaps those should be supported.
Well, I can only speak as a volunteer guide at Manchester Art Gallery, and I have been speaking to people there about how art is chosen, because I think it was alluded to before that, you know, there'll be certain flavours of the month, and some artists will get a better crack at it than others. But I do know that there are so many competing projects and artists, and people like the Art Gallery have got to think about all the different types of people. And the Art Gallery has got to think of all the different types of people within Greater Manchester and get something, you know, to try and reach, and sometimes reach people that art wouldn't necessarily reach. I'm not an expert.
No, I can see there's some people that want to ask some questions, so we'll take a few more. We'll take a few more questions in, and I think by that time we'll probably be asking the speakers to kind of come back and respond, and maybe sort of...
Can I just add something on to that? Because I just got a thought. Because yes, we want art to go out into the world and to kind of do stuff. We've got to be careful though, because the approach that we take now, you know, the Michael Gove-like approach to things, which is to dumb things down. And I very often think that if you just kind of put stuff out there, people will trip over it. I think there's a whole other conversation that we need to have of that, the educated audience. And that's another thing entirely, which won't come into what we're talking about. Well, there's no time for that now, I think. But sometimes, you know, things just go out there and people will trip over them, you know, if they're unexpected, I suppose. And I think that's probably the best way of going about things. You know, not to kind of... If we try too hard, we might end up kind of killing it off by watering it down. Let's make it palatable. So then we're assuming that what other people want. over assuming what is in somebody else's mind, and then we actually sort of don't respect. And a lot of writers make this mistake by kind of talking down, not trusting their readers. I just reviewed a book for somebody recently, and they wanted my sort of feedback on it, and I said, you don't trust your reader, you're double underlining everything to make sure they get it. So you're treating them like an idiot, so we mustn't do that. We have to be careful of that.
I'll take a few more questions then, yeah.
One of the best art exhibitions I've ever seen was a couple of years ago. I've been in lots of art galleries in Britain and around the world, I suppose, over the years. It was in Harrogate, and it wasn't in the main art gallery, it was in a smaller gallery. But all the work on display came from the council's art gallery museum service. And the art exhibition, if you want to call it an art exhibition, was chosen by individual people that lived in Harrogate. There was the policeman, the crossing lady, the dinner lady, the gardener, a cross-section of people. And it was the most amazing collection of art I've ever seen. Because to some degree, it was the local people selecting from the archives of this great cellar they have that's never seen the light of day, their preference. So you've got a wonderful selection of artworks, and I've never seen that done before. I thought it was fascinating.
Thanks, that's great. Does anyone else like to add, yeah?
Yeah, could you say, like, broadly, there's two art scenes, that there's a sort of urban art scene where people want to go to London, Paris, New York and engage in the art world, the art market, etc. And then is there a sort of separate art world of people who want to go, you know, and live in a small community? And if so, what defines those two communities, those two outlooks?
Well, I'm not an artist, and I don't even know what I like. But I'm listening to people talking about art and artists as a separate category of citizen. It makes me question that, because creativity is not confined to people who are part of the fine art world. We live close to one of the most creative science communities in the world. Creativity is visible not just in what we would call the arts disciplines, but among science and technology. And I don't know much about that either, but in history and in philosophy, we have proximity to all of those. But it's the notion that an artist is a person who is, it's like Robert Roberts, in the slum but not of it, in New Mills but not of it, in the art, in the art centre but not of it. I haven't got a particular question about that. I'm just uncomfortable about it. I know I'm not. I used to think I hadn't a creative bone in my body, until I had to write a thesis, and then I thought, oh no, actually that's new. Nobody has thought those thoughts and constructed that argument before. That is new. My garden is new. I like creating gardens. But I'm just uneasy about the notion that the artist is somebody who is in Mills but not of it.
Yes, I would add to that that New Mills is a working town, and that the artists that you see here are very much involved with what we would describe as ordinary working life. The bones of the town are very much a community which is at work. I mean, not everybody who lives in New Mills works in New Mills, but there is this solid background of a normal, can I say, an ordinary community which is here. And the artists, a lot of them come out of that community, and that's what gives them the strength and the commitment to the place. It's You don't put them in a separate box. And the other thing I would like to say is that we don't have the snobby artist element at all. You know, there's no sort of gallery clique. We're just people. And a lot of us are very creative people, and that's what explains the fact that it works for us. I think if we were more upper class, if we were, you know, it wouldn't be the same. This is the wonderful thing about New Mills, that it, as I say, we're a working environment. We're working artists, we're working carpenters, we're working in the sweetie factory. You know, it's all part of the same thing.
And then, is that you, Simon, back in again? Yeah, go on.
That's a really intriguing point for me. See, I think that there's one thing that stands out a mile about Derbyshire Open Arts and New Mills Art Fest, and that's a consequence of the volunteer activity. So both of those events are volunteer inspired, volunteer organised, volunteer led. And the thing that comes out of it, for me, is an element of quality control and aspiration that isn't present in what Claire just mentioned as, Janet just mentioned as the snobbishness of the art gallery. For me, I find art galleries incredibly frustrating these days because they do talk down to their audience and they don't trust their audience with confidently curating exhibitions. A lot of the signage from exhibitions now disappears because they're not confident enough to say what they think and explain why they chose certain pieces of art. And that snobbishness, if only those organisations were snobbish in a curatory kind of way. But I think the thing that shines out of Derbyshire Open Arts today is the quality, maybe not from curation, and probably more from inspired artists that are eking it out themselves without paymasters of the Art Council patronising rubbish art. But there is a real problem at the heart of art today, which is something around that curation issue, and a return to the values that led to that snobbishness is probably a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Yeah, I have to come back on that, and I know I'm the chair, but I also have a background and ran a gallery, and I think that actually, you know, Simon, when you were talking about snobbishness, I think that's probably what it appears to be. In fact, I think you hit on the head that a lot of it is actually just a failure to kind of take authority or to stepping back, really. And so, you know, inviting the public to come and select work to show in an exhibition is actually more common, I think, than you think. It is quite common. And I think that there is a problem then between this sort of these two worlds. What someone raised the question there, is there something called the art world, which is all about creating critical bodies of work which will become big art? And then is there another world which is a kind of creative space where people feel very good and because they're involved in creative activities and they're volunteering, and both regard each other as either with indifference or with disdain, and that there isn't actually a connection between creativity and art, which maybe there should be. I just want to add something there, which is actually might be interesting, is that the Arts Council and the DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and the Arts and Humanities Research Council is actually looking at creativity right now. It has commissioned a massive piece of research to look at what makes people creative and, interestingly, how they can measure it. So they will be asking those questions about what is art and what is creativity, and is craft and also hobbies, are they aspects of creativity, and what separates them? We should be asking, I think, what separates that from art.
Yes, we've not really mentioned craft, have we, this evening?
I wonder if there's any more, maybe one or two very quick questions, because then I'm going to ask actually the speakers to sum up. And so, is there anyone else who'd like to add anything? Okay, we've got a few questions there were raised. Sum up, come back on the questions. James, do you want to start?
Yeah, my friend on the camera. I think it's worth saying that there are two worlds, and that's not a disaster or a terrible thing or whatever. And I think to put it in perspective, there's been a massive acculturation in Britain over the last 30 years. I mean to say that right up until about 1990, it was a commonplace on the front pages of the popular newspapers to do a demolition of the latest avant-garde artwork. It would be like Carl Andre's bricks or something like that, and that is gone. You know, that kind of demotic philistinism, which I remember. The point being made very well by, I've forgotten his name now, but there isn't an avant-garde and a kind of high culture anymore. The avant-garde is the high culture. You know, the differences between the Edinburgh Festival and the Edinburgh Fringe just completely disintegrated, because the avant-garde, and you see it now, and it's quite extraordinary in a way. If you go to the Tate Moderne, why don't they say that? And there they are on a Sunday. It's like a temple, and the massed crowds are all there watching, looking at Armut's urinal, and it's unbelievable in a way the extent to which the tolerance of the avant-garde has increased, and I think that's all good. It's an acculturation, and it's an important thing, but it's not the same thing. But to consume is not the same thing as to produce. And art colonies have been important. I can remember as a boy being in St Ives and seeing Patrick Heron at the easel, and it was intriguing because he was dirt poor. The guy was actually dirt poor, was actually in a smock, I'm not kidding, with a bar fire, painting these abstract expressionist works. I think he's, went on to be, he's the chief of College of Art now, but then he was dirt poor, as was Terry Frost and those people, and they were entirely personally or inwardly motivated. Their sense of being artists was in their heads, and they kept at it, and eventually people believed them because they were so driven. And that's why, there were two reasons they lived in St Ives. One was the light is fantastic, and the other was that the fishing industry had collapsed, and they used to rent out all the places that the fishermen used to keep their boats, which made fantastic studios, for like £6 a week. You could have this fabulous big studio by the beach. If you take the film forward to the 1990s, the art colony in London was awash with money. They were the exact opposite. Nobody was wearing a smock. Saatchi was spending money hand over fist. It was a productive thing. Creative. It inspired lots of people. All that. What was it? Cole Porter said my biggest inspiration was a phone call from my producer. So when Saatchi started to spend money at St Martin's art degree show, it had a huge impact, and it engendered a lot of creativity. And you could see the whole of the art world in London would move from the west to the east. It was like drawn like to Mammon, from God to man. You know, it was moving from Hampstead into Hackney, Hoxton, places that were wrecks, by the way, that were industrial wrecks with nothing. And they call it, you know, geographers call it now, it's called the Hoxton effect, meaning to say the artists bid up the price of the place, it becomes a place where people want to live, and then eventually the artists can't live there anymore. Hebden Bridge probably not quite there yet, but you know, so these things are all happening, and that was a great thing. You know, it was a huge, in terms of it was a big inspiration, but I think probably too much, actually. Do you know what I mean? A lot of that work, I'm not sure how good it's going to look 20 years from now, 30 years from now. But then that's always the case, isn't it? You've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find your prince.
The only comment I would make is that it's not an element that the papers aren't headlining this load of rubbish, because we've got used to it, because we have got used to it. It's not the shock of the new now, is it? Because when you think of people like Mealy, how he used to shock, and we just look at it as a lovely religious paintings. It's not a shock anymore, but I agree with a lot of the things you've said, and a lot of the things that the audience has said.
I mean, informing those judgments then, though, about whether something it has value, and it is something that takes time. Do you think do we sort of try to rush?
There's no answer to it. You know, you describe the project, but I feel there's a fatal flaw, because you can't say ahead of time, you know, why this work is good, because the work itself is the best account of itself, isn't it? You know, and all measures in a way will fall short of. All measures will fall short, because they're, you know, it's like to say, you know, it's like freedom. If you tried to define what freedom was, you would already put a limit upon the thing, and it would cease to be freedom. Creativity is a bit like that. It's funny how the words changed. You know, I think we say creativity now like it's a good thing, but you know, it never used to be such a marvellous thing. Creative, when I was a boy, was a kind of euphemism for being gay, and it wasn't a complimentary thing. It's true. It's a bit creative.
Actually, I mean, I must say, you know, I agree with so much of what's been talked about and what you've been talking about. I was thinking about what you were saying about, you know, where is it? I hear you. I personally don't set myself apart. I just know I've always been a bit creative, but not like that. And yeah. The thing is that, you know, being a human being is creative, isn't it? Being human is creative. What we've done is we dull our edges. I mean, just the opposite of that. I was thinking the other day, you know, because we had the local elections, haven't we? And I was wondering when did it become? When did we kind of want people to kind of be our leaders who don't have any love, who are kind of egoistic and kind of insane and kind of over-identified with division, kind of thing? When did those become the qualities of leadership? You know, a long time ago, I know, and yet individually we're not like that. You know, it's quite a strange thing, isn't it? People on their own are great, but as a country we're really screwed, and all over the world we're really screwed. And I think art is that remembering, I suppose, of kind of the human bits, and I think creativity, you know, kind of then comes into it. And I think that's the difference between the kind of the two different art worlds, perhaps, as well, kind of thing. You have the artist working on something, and that's the genuine human sort of experience, and then you have the other thing, kind of thing, which some people chase being members of. You know, I tried for a while myself to get into kind of the book world and things, and it didn't want me, kind of thing. You know, but then I don't fit on the community level either. So where do you go? Well, you just get on writing the next poem and the next book. You don't worry in a way about that. If you do, then that's what you'll spend your time doing. Nothing will be produced, I suppose. But yeah, I don't know, just coming back to the Pennines, I just want to kind of come back to the Pennines for a minute. There is something though, isn't there? There is something. I can't put my finger on it. There's some kind of energy, but we have to be careful to kind of not be too parochial about it, I suppose. But there is something up here. I mean, you read the first page of Wuthering Heights and it's there. There it is. It's kind of, what she called it? A place for misanthropes and, yeah. And Ted Hughes, I did a thing for BBC Two with Keris Matthews about kind of Celtic poetry. And Ted Hughes was very interested in the Kingdom of Elmet. And he thought that Heptonstall, which is kind of just above Hebden, was kind of like the centre of this kind of feudal kingdom. And the thing that I've kind of noticed, perhaps, about, and that Ted talked about too, is that for some reason the people of the Pennines had this kind of fierce independence, perhaps. And again, it's that something that's in the water. And maybe it's that there's this kind of independent spirit kind of here as well, you know, and that maybe that's what kind of comes through.
I think there is something in the artist, perhaps drawn, the writer and the poet and the painter, to the heroic in the everyday. And I think if there is a northern vernacular, perhaps that's what it is that the people who live in these places where they aren't at the centre and where they're dominated by these unforgiving landscapes, that there is then heroism in that is something that would be inspiring. I think that's very different then in looking at a place as being a place of inspiration than the attempt to kind of work out what the formula is, which I think is probably what the Arts Council is trying to do in this research, to see, is there a formula, can we invest, and once we've invested in it, will that then produce creativity, art? And I think it is something, you're saying there, John, you know what it is, but you can't put your finger on it.
Well, it's the life force, isn't it? It's the life force. I mean, we're essentially creative. That's what we do. Yeah, you know, creative is just that we start identifying with image and ego at a kind of a certain age, and that's placed upon us more and more, which is kind of like, say, kind of the modern kind of educational ethic kind of thing. Well, maybe it's always been that, but there's kind of, you know, there are ways of educating us that kind of either allow us to be or kind of try to dull us down. But it always breaks through, you know, just like, you know, if we don't tend our buildings for 30 years, then the grass takes over and the trees poke out. Well, creativity is the same. Yeah.
Thanks. Anyone to add anything? Or are we going to wind up? Dead on time, I think, Simon, are we? Fantastic. Thanks very much then for a really interesting and compelling discussion. And thanks to the speakers and thanks to everyone who's contributed.
Thank you to Pauline for being a fantastic chairperson.